Anyway, though, he does decide to call, so we're already pretty far off the solver. I'll still show you how the hand would typically play out, but this is the spot where solver's kind of already out the window, and it's important to recognize that. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, back with another hand from the 200-400 heads-up slugfest between Doug Polk and Dan Negreanu. They're gambling it up. Here, Doug Polk raises it up with pocket sevens, which is perfectly fine in standard, and Negreanu calls with the 6-3 suited. I realize some of you may be thinking, why would you call with 6-3 suited? You have two undercards. Well, Negreanu doesn't know what Doug Polk has, and also it's very profitable to defend because you're getting reasonable pot odds. I have free heads-up pre-flop charts available for you at pokercoaching.com/HUNL. So make sure you go and collect those so that you play well pre-flop. Anyway, standard pre-flop stuff. Flop comes 5, 4, 2. Negreanu has the literal nuts, the straight. And Doug Polk has the effective nuts, an overpair. Both these hands are very strong. Whenever you have a setup, a lot of money is going to go into the pot, but that's not really the main focus point of this hand. So Negreanu checks as he should do with his entire range. And then Doug Polk uses a small bet size, which is rather interesting. If we look at the GTO solver, what it recommends doing here is using primarily a 75% pot bet when you are betting here. This is a board that should connect okay with the player in the big blind, so you can't just bet every single time. And whenever you're betting more polarized, when you're usually betting your best hands and a lot of draw type hands or decently strong hands, this is a spot where when you are betting, you typically want to go on the bigger side. And you see the betting strategy is very polarized. He has aces here, which are very happy. Notice kings, queens, and jacks and tens all actually check a decent amount of the time, which is kind of surprising to me as a non-heads-up expert. We see a lot of the good ace highs checking because if they just check down, they probably win. We see some king highs checking because if they check down, they probably win. But then you see stuff like queen high, jack high, 10 high, 9 high. These hands are all often preferring to bet. And that's because if they check down with 9 high, you're going to lose, right? Also notice that a lot of the sixes are betting for a gut shot. A lot of the fives are betting for a pair. Some of the fours are betting. A lot of the threes are betting for an open-ended straight draw, right? So you see a lot of draws betting with the threes and the sixes, and then a lot of pretty strong hands like the fives and some fours, right? So this is pretty standard stuff, and it's worth noting here, though, that Doug Polk chose the 40% pot bet with his pocket sevens. And that makes me think that Doug Polk is perhaps trying to exploit Negreanu in some way. Whenever you use a smaller bet size in this scenario, probably what's happening is he is assuming Negreanu is just going to straight up fold out way too quickly with a lot of hands, and that's going to allow him to use a small bet size very, very frequently and just win this pot way more often than he should. Because if we do look at this strategy here that Negreanu should be using, he actually has to stick around pretty wide, right? We see all of these backdoor draws with overcards having to call, right? We see really all sorts of stuff having to call against the 75% pot bet, which is what I'm assuming happens here because, as you see here, this is like basically the only line that's taken. So kind of a neat spot where as you use a smaller bet size, Negreanu has to start calling with more of these hands that are folded, these hands in blue. So that's going to be like king highs. Is he really calling with king highs? I don't know. What about queen highs? Is he really calling with queen highs? I don't know. So neat scenario. Anyway, though, this hand takes another interesting turn where Negreanu opts to just call with his straight. And another pretty neat spot because this is a hand that almost always prefers to raise, right? If you take a look at 6-3 suited, you see it is raising 96% of the time in this spot, like basically every time. Yet Negreanu is not raising it. Why is he not raising it? He's not raising it because he, I think, thinks, and I think most people think, that Doug Polk really, really, really likes to bluff. And often when he is bluffing on the river, he often prefers the bigger bet sizes. And if you know your opponent is inclined to overbet bluff the river whenever they happen to have a non-showdown value hand that has some sort of blocker, then you can strengthen your check calling range on the flop, and that's going to result in you being able to easily catch a lot of those bluffs going to the later betting rounds. In exchange for that, though, sometimes you lose value with your nut hands. Like right here, when Negreanu just calls with 6-3, let's say the turn is any card higher than a 7, right? Say it's a jack. And at that point, then it's going to be kind of hard for Negreanu to get all of Doug Polk's stack in the pot. Whereas if he just raises immediately on the flop, the pot gets big, and then the 7s is in a pretty rough spot where it just can't really justify folding all that often. Anyway, though, he does decide to call, so we're already pretty far off the solver. I'll still show you how the hand would typically play out, but this is the spot where solver's kind of already out the window, and it's important to recognize that. So, in this scenario, he does check call. Turn is the worst card in the deck for Doug Polk. I guess it gives him some outs, right? But now he is going to end up having to stack off. Negreanu checks, as he should very frequently do here, and Doug Polk is, of course, going to continue betting. He does use a rather large bet size, which is interesting. If we go over here to his strategy on the turn, it does show that he should mostly use about a 50% pot bet size with the pocket 7s. But again, kind of a neat scenario where if he thinks Negreanu is doing a whole lot of bluff catching once he does call that flop bet, then Polk might as well just bet bigger with the nuts and just get a lot of money in the pot, right? Also, we have seen Doug Polk typically prefer the bigger bet sizes in general on the turn to set up big bet sizes on the river, where he probably thinks Negreanu is over folding a bit. Back around to Negreanu. Take a second and ask yourself, what would you do with the 6-3 in this spot? Well, you know you're not folding. Would you call? Would you raise tiny to about 7,000? Would you raise medium to about 10,000? Or would you raise big to about 15,000? Take a second and really consider this, because this is a key point in the hand. Because you have to decide, am I really just going to try to super trap my opponent, or am I going to raise immediately, try to get money in the pot whenever my opponent has a strong hand or a draw? What I want you to do is I want you to go to the comment section below this video and type in which of the options you would do. I'll wait a second for you to do it. Because doing this will go a long way to helping you think about poker actively and improve your poker skills. There are a lot of training sites out there that put you in front of a video for 45 minutes and say, here, watch this. And I know good and well, a lot of you are sipping on a beer, watching Netflix and chilling on the side, and you're not necessarily actively paying attention to the study session that you are involved in, right? And what I do at my training site, pokercoaching.com, is we have a lot of interactive quizzes like this that force you to make decisions so that you get immediate feedback, good or bad, on what you did, right? That way you're continuously learning at a very, very rapid rate. You can get a free membership to pokercoaching.com, by the way. Check it out, pokercoaching.com/free. All right, cool spot. Negreanu elects to call, going for the maximum trap. I'm actually not in love with this play, because whenever you call here, the only time this is great is when Doug Polk is going to be substantially over-bluffing in this scenario. And the thing is, I think Doug Polk could be making this bet with a lot of marginal hands that are just trying to get protection, like a 5. If we go back over here to the solver, we see here that a lot of the 5s are opting to bet, right? Notice like King 5, Ace 5, Queen 5, all these hands are betting, and quite often they're not going to bet on a lot of rivers. Notice some of the 4s even are betting, and they're not going to bet again on a lot of rivers, because a lot of rivers are going to be bad for these hands, right? So kind of a neat scenario. If we take a look at Negreanu's turn strategy, though, you see he already raised the vast majority of the 6-3s on the flop. But if he did happen to have that tiny, tiny fraction of 6-3 suited on the flop, he should also raise it on the turn. It says, again, 94% of the time he should raise it on the turn. So we had a spot where he should raise the flop like 94% of the time with the straight, and he should also raise the turn 94% of the time. So Negreanu, from a GTO point of view, should basically never have the 6-3 when he gets to the river in this manner, which is neat to see. Also notice 8-6 for the turn straight raises the vast majority of the time as well. And that's just because when you have a strong hand with deep stacks, you really, 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 really want to build the pot. And whenever you don't build the pot here, especially when your opponent's range could conceivably be betting with a lot of hands like a 5 or a 4 or a 7 that may or may not continue betting on the river because the pot's already pretty big, right? You want to get money in immediately. Anyway, he does call. In this scenario, of course, Doug Polk's going to lose a bunch of money. Negreanu checks river. Doug Polk, of course, goes for the bet. Notice Doug Polk, again, goes for a big bet, 1.5 times the size of the pot. probably fine as long as he is balancing it reasonably. Notice here, sevens actually prefer all in, which is kind of cool. We see the all-in range is used 15% of the time. Whenever Doug Polk does take this line of betting kind of big on the flop, well, you know, that's what the software would recommended, big on the turn, and then we get to the river, very often you will see big overbets being used. And in this spot, I want to make it clear, all-in is 5 times the size of the pot. 15% of the time, with your range, from a GTO point of view, you should be ripping it all in for 5 times pot. What are you ripping in for 5 times pot with? Sets, straights, and then some sporadic bluffs with an 8 and with a 6 and with some 3s. Kind of cool to see, huh? 8s, 6s, and 3s. So basically, some of the busted draws and some of the nut hands, you are ripping it in. Also, we see 6-3 here, right? What's the other straight? Ace-3. Ace-3 often opts to bet big as well. So pretty cool spot where GTO Solver actually likes betting gigantic. 5 times pot. Anyway, Doug Polk does go 1.5 times pot. Obviously, Negreanu is going to raise. This is a spot where it definitely makes sense to go all in. You don't want to get fancy and go for a min raise or anything like that, because if Doug Polk has a straight or a set or a 2 pair, he's going to call, right? And if he has nothing, like a 6 or an 8 or the 3, he's just going to fold. So we get over here. We see Negreanu, of course, is going to raise. But again, notice he actually doesn't have this hand in his range. What hands should he raise in this scenario? He should be raising with sets, 5s and 4s when he has them, 7s when he has it, 8-6 when he has it, Jack 7 suited sometimes when he has it, straight raise 3 when he has it, and then just a few sporadic bluffs. Sporadic bluffs include a 6, a7, kind of a weird bluff with a7, ace-4, kind of a weird bluff with ace-4, 6-2. So it looks like they're using a lot of the blocker cards. So where you have a pair that probably isn't good when Polk takes this very aggressive line, right? And then also a blocker to block his set/straight combination. So pretty neat to see. Obviously, though, you're raising when you have the nuts, of course. And, well, the nuts, I realize. Well, is it still the nuts? It is still the nuts. Almost the nuts. Almost the nuts. The 8-6 is the nuts. Doesn't really matter. You have to understand. Whenever you're playing heads up, when you have the effective nuts, like second nut straight, that's the nuts. You're happy with it. Anyway, back around to Doug Polk. And we see here, if he has a set, he should call the majority of the time. But notice pocket fours actually folds some portion of the time, which, you know, I don't think many people are doing. Jack 7 for top 2 pair finds a call. Jack 5 finds a call only half the time. Jack 4 finds a call even less often. Same thing for Jack 2. And notice 7-5 actually does fold the vast majority of the time, which is kind of neat. I'm not sure if people are actually folding hands like 7-5 here, but it's important to note, whenever you do take this overly strong line where you bet flop, bet turn big, and then blast river, when your opponent then check raises you all in, they know they're check raising into a range that contains a lot of nut hands. So if they are check raising into a range that contains a lot of nut hands, either they're making one of the few sporadic bluffs, or they have a hand that actually does pretty well against the sporadic nut hands. Like, well, right here. Anyway, Doug Polk has to call the 7s, though. Folding the 7s would just be a little bit too tight, especially since Negreanu may be bluffing every once in a while. I'm not sure if he actually does that. And he could actually be check raising a few slightly worse hands. So definitely a cooler for Doug Polk, but it's a neat hand where both players were already off the solver on the flop, and it showed how perhaps these players are adjusting early in the hand to try to take advantage of what they think the other player is perhaps doing incorrectly. So fun stuff. That's going to be it for today. If you enjoy these hands that I've been reviewing of this Doug Polk Heads Up Cadillac of Poker Battle, click the like button below, click subscribe. That would go a long way to letting the YouTube overlords know that people like my content. There's also a notification bell. If you want to be notified whenever I'm putting out a video, click the notification button. So yeah, I would appreciate it. Hope you have a great week. Good luck in your games. Have fun. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you. If you were not here watching, I would not be making these videos. So thanks for being here. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to pokercoaching.com right now at pokercoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.